When I was in 7th grade, I had my first crush on Keith, a 13-year-old chain-smoking, piano-playing musical theater prodigy. He was the perfect combination of bad boy and theater nerd. We took the same 45-minute bus ride to and from school, which gave us plenty of time to huddle in a back seat, making out, blowing smoke out the window, and debating the relative merits of Harold Pinter and Sam Shepard. Yeah, I was a theater nerd too. It was bliss. One afternoon, Keith plopped himself next to me, holding a raggedy paperback, and asked if I had ever read Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. When I said no, he asked if I'd like to read it out loud with him. This was like theater nerd foreplay. I spent the next couple of afternoons alternating between the characters of Martha and Honey as we rode past Yankee Stadium back to Manhattan, and I was riveted. When we got to the climactic scene where, in a final act of revenge, George publicly kills off his and Martha's imaginary son, the pain and pathos of these tormented characters completely knocked me on my ass. This was the kind of story I wanted to tell as an actress. These were the kind of characters I wanted to bite into. This was the play that solidified my future. Not long after, I came across the movie version on television starring Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, and she became my idol. I had never seen anything else she had done, and quickly devoured all I could find on WPIX, National Velvet, A Place in the Sun, Giant, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. She was passionate and daring and a little dangerous. She was perfection. Fast forward a few years to spring break when I was 16. Keith had long since dumped me for a better singer. My mom, stepdad, and I were spending a week in Puerto Vallarta, and as an only child, I was mostly at loose ends, trying to figure out ways to keep myself occupied on the beach all day. I was a little shy about trying to make friends in these situations, but I noticed another girl on her own at the water's edge, and we started chatting. Her name was Ozzy, and she was cool and friendly, so we hung out for a while. Eventually, she said she had to rejoin her family for lunch, but invited me over to their house in town for dinner. Sure, why not? She said she and her brother would pick me up at 7, and I left the beach to have lunch with my own family and tell them of my dinner plans. As we waited for our ceviche, the snack bar was buzzing. My mom said, "I heard Elizabeth Taylor is here somewhere." Suddenly, she was fixated on a spot beyond my shoulder. "Oh my God, she's right over there!" I did my best nonchalant pivot to glance behind me, and there she was. It took me a moment to process the fact that she was sitting right next to Ozzy. Suddenly, it started to dawn on me. Mom, I think I'm having dinner with Elizabeth Taylor tonight." Turns out Ozzy was the daughter of Senator John Warner, Liz's current husband. Needless to say, we could barely contain our shock and thrill. I spent the rest of my afternoon enjoying my mother's jealousy and reeling between excitement and terror at meeting a living legend. My living legend. 25 outfit changes later, they arrived to pick me up. Ozzy and her brother Christopher, the son of Liz and her second husband, Michael Wilding, turned up in a Jeep Wrangler and suggested we stop at a local carnival along the way. I should add that Christopher had his mother's violet blue eyes and curly dark hair and went to college in Hawaii, so I probably would have followed him anywhere. Off we went, sharing a joint along the way, and spent about an hour riding rickety Mexican Ferris wheels and roller coasters. I was, of course, trying to do a credible job of acting much cooler than I was. Like, no big deal, I hang out with the children of movie stars all the time. When we finally arrived at the house, I was happy, wind-blown, just a little stoned, and we hadn't even gotten to the main event. It was a big house, As a matter of fact, it was the house that Elizabeth and Richard Burton had shared during the filming of Night of the Iguana. It spanned both sides of the street with a bridge connecting both halves. After their divorce, Liz got one side and Richard got the other, but they left the bridge. A very romantic slice of history. We went inside, and my breath caught just a little as I shook her hand. She was wearing little makeup, no jewelry, and a very wide emerald green muumuu, as she was in her larger phase by then. Definitely not the glamorous Hollywood royalty of my imagination, but she still had that effortless grace and the Maggie the Cat voice. After a friendly hello, Liz excused herself to return to the kitchen where she was making chili rellenos. That's right. Elizabeth Taylor was making me chili rellenos. There was no staff around and no fuss. I don't know what I expected, but this wasn't it. I had never met anybody really famous, but I just didn't think it would all be so normal. In the living room, there were some family scrapbooks on the coffee table, the kind that most people have with snapshots of cousins and birthday parties and family reunions. I have no recollection of what Ozzie and Christopher were doing at this point, but they ceased to matter as I flipped through their books of snapshots from movie sets. Of course, there were shots from Night of the Iguana. And then, there they were. Liz and Richard on the set of Virginia Woolf. Between takes goofing off, or deep in their characters, or smoking cigarettes, it was a pinch-me moment in a pinch-me night. When we finally sat down to dinner, there was some general chit-chat and a little weird pressure on Ozzie, who I think may have had an eating disorder, before the conversation eventually turned to me. I tried to push through my sheepish embarrassment as I explained that I wanted to be an actress. I so did not want to come off as some goofy fan who was unaccustomed to being in such situations, though both of those things were completely true. I did eventually get around to mentioning that I admired her work, especially in Virginia Woolf, as I had a particular affection for the play, because how could I not? She was extremely gracious and thought it was funny that a teenage girl would find so much to connect with about a story about middle-aged failure and regret. I could offer no good explanation other than maybe it had something to do with my parents' divorce. There was a moment as she gazed at me with those eyes and smiled before saying, "Yes, I guess that would do it." After the meal, the rellenos were amazing. Ozzie and Christopher and I crept out to the edge of the bridge to look down on the autograph seekers and fans that came knocking at the door. Evidently, this was a nightly entertainment. We laughed at them, which was a little surreal because what the hell was I doing on this side of the door? Ozzie and I hung out for another couple of days at the beach and exchanged addresses and numbers, but not surprisingly, we never saw each other again. It was the pre-internet age, after all. I thought about her when Elizabeth and Senator Warner divorced, but our brief encounter that saved each of us from a week of loneliness remained exactly that. I am sure that my dinner with Elizabeth Taylor was an insignificant blip on her radar, some friend that one of her kids brought home for an evening. But it was anything but that for me. Aside from the obvious thrill of meeting one of my idols, I was privileged to catch a glimpse of her humanity and life that was filled with success, but also with pathos and humor and compassion and dirty dishes. Now, I am actually older than I was when I met her. I am now old enough to play Albie's Martha, and I have some battle scars to prove it. And I think about my teenage self with stars in her eyes, who got to have dinner with her favorite movie star, but didn't realize that she'd have to do some living and maybe learn to cook her own chili rellenos before she could play the role of her dreams.